Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a pretty chill Sunday, as it as it goes. Hopefully, I haven't got too much Charles left.
Eventually gonna get some reading in,
Eventually,
hopefully.
you
It's the
plan your reading. You're one of those people who has to plan to read.
No, I'll usually get into a vein of stuff, and then you want to just kind of keep reading it, but it's kind of that age-old joke of when you're younger and you don't have the money to invest in this stuff you'd really like to read, watch, or hear.
Yeah.
But then when you're older and you have the money and you buy it, then it's when do you find the time to indulge? I'm always happy to chew the fat about whatever the obsessions are, or any interest.
Come about the world as we have it. I mean, we should start with the first question because I do have some set questions, which is, who are you?
My name's Paul Kortjohn. I'm an independent cartoonist, so my stuff usually leans a bit more into just gross out comedy for the most part. Sometimes not necessarily too heavy on the gross out, but like the most recent book that's due out this month from Know Nothing Publishing is Donald Trump's Super Awesome American Adventure, and it's presented as this comic that you're reading is he's approaching Todd McFarlane at a cafe to try to get Image to publish it, and so Todd cracks it open, and then we're met with the story, and it's just a complete 50-50 mix of canon action films type plot progression and one-liners, and then the genuine rabbit hole of QAnon beliefs. And I just thought the two would go really well together. I think it's funny. It's got some good reviews, and I actually hit up quite a few of my art heroes for blurbs and was pleasantly surprised and relieved. And my fear was, of course, that they'd see the title and then never make it beyond that and think, oh God, it's some sort of really bizarro far right kind of guy trying to do Trump fan fiction.
There was, I'm not going to lie, when I first kind of opened your profile and I was like, okay. And I've seen this a couple of times where, like you say, you people who make art about Trump and the whole situation, it's going to go one way or another. So you kind of have to do your reading to see where this is going to go.
Yeah. You can get the people who take it too seriously, where it's sort of like, this is my stab in the face of a man. But I wanted to do just the Mad Magazine kind of thing, where you have your topic and you might have your opinion on the matter, but you kind of just treat it with the attitude of the class clown, like, I'm just going to make poo-poo pee-pee jokes and it just stars this thing, which is very much the attitude that book takes. And the guy that I sent it to for a blurb that I was excited that he read it at all, but I think kind of would get it the most is Lawrence Hubbard, who does Real Deal Comics.
Okay.
Which, have you ever read that stuff?
I've not read it. I've heard of it though.
Fantagraphics put out a pretty affordable collection of it, and it's just balls out action, stuff that you probably wouldn't want your mom looking through, or the general public looking over your shoulder while you're reading it. But it's got a very once again kind of a Mad Magazine or Simpsons sort of thing, where you start off with the story, there's the inciting incident, and then you just see how far in the stratosphere you can take it to ridiculous levels.
So you've not managed to get one to Todd McFarlane then?
No, I did think my first ongoing comic or long form thing was a serialized thing for Know Nothing called Not Spawn, which was just about this Napoleon Dynamite kind of douchebag who gets a bunch of Spawn comics and decides, I'm going to become a vigilante, And in his own mind, he's out there performing heroic tasks, but it's really just this goofus in a badly made Spawn outfit with a machete going out hacking people. And we kind of follow that. And of course, it ends with him getting murdered by one of the women that he had saved, but then he gets upset that the babes aren't falling for him.
Okay.
And this girl left her purse, so he goes to return it, and she thinks he's stalking him, and it turns into this cartoonish bloodbath that ends with him getting murdered with his own machete. And I did think about sending a copy to Todd McFarlane or trying to find out how to get a copy in his hands, but he's pretty litigious.
Yeah, I was having this conversation the other day actually. Always find it interesting how some public figures are very easy to contact, and
Yeah.
some are completely hidden, and it's always surprising on some of the ones you can contact, and some of the ones you can get in contact with, and just have an email address just readily available if you
Yeah.
and you get a reply, and it's kind of nice when you know other times, like you say, Tom McFarlane's protected by such and such and such barrier and agent, and there's no way to really contact him. But at the same time, I appreciate that if I was that kind of popularity, I wouldn't want everyone in the world emailing.
Yeah. I could imagine that if he had a more public email, the amount of guys in their 30s and 40s constantly trying to email him art or Spawn story ideas probably be enough that, makes you want to go sit in traffic.
I mean, we've all had that stage where we read Spawn and thought, yeah, that could be me.
Anyone that has read Spawn and liked it inevitably had in their notebook at school their own version of the hell hero.
Yeah. It's the same with Batman. Like, it's very much, you see it and you're like, oh yeah, I could be Batman. I don't work out and I have no money, but I could be Batman.
I'd love to, see someone put together a coffee table book that compiles the sort of 12 to 16-year-old, into middle school, middle high school thing where it's the kids that like superheroes that create their own, but really it's the fanfic version. But it's always that same kind of thing where it's shot up to 11. I had a friend whose character was basically Wolverine, but he had 4 claws and they came out of his knuckles. And I think he was a cyborg or something. There's some sort of thing where his forearm could extend and he would make like this jackhammer motion. And my friend was really into the idea of, he's got super arms, so he's not like Wolverine.
He's not quite like him, but he's also very like him.
Yeah. He's not like Wolverine. He's got 4 claws. So there's a difference.
You just reminded me, I'm struggling for the name. There's a superhero film with Will Smith in it. I can't remember the name of it. It's where he plays like a drunken superhero. Hancock.
Oh yeah.
A film called Hancock. And I remember watching an interview with him, and someone was asking, why were you interested in this character? Why did you want to be this person? And he said something along the lines of like, oh, well, I thought it'd be interesting to do a brand new hero who had powers which no one had ever really seen or looked into before. And the interviewer kind of sits there and goes, but your character can fly, is invulnerable, and ends up with like a Boy Scout persona. And there's a moment where his brain's just going, oh no, what did I say? Did we just rip off Superman in a major way?
There was that kind of weird period in the late, like before Dark Knight, but after kind of that glut of Daredevil and the first few X-Men movies, where there were the original superhero or original concept superheroes movies. The one that is really good and no one's ever seen is I'll have to look. I think it's called Super, but it's got Michael Rappaport in it.
Oh wait, does this have
He's on some sort of drug study, and it's basically a placebo, and so you keep seeing this thing where he'll try to show them, look, I can fly, and he'll jump off the desk and be floating, and then you see what the the doctors see, and he's just smashed his face into the floor and is bloody, and is just laying on his belly going, "Oh, I'm flying." And then, of
So,
course, at the end, there's a it ends with a bit of he does perform some sort of extraordinary task, and you're
right.
left wondering, hmm, it's got
So,
some very generic name. Like it's not super, but it's something like that.
no, because I think Super is there's another film called
Oh,
Super,
that's
which
the one with
the
Dwight from The Office.
yeah, I was just about to say the guy from The Office. I can never remember his real name. But that one came out kind of like post Kick-Ass. And that was
Yeah,
like they're like, oh, we need to amp up Kick-Ass to be more R-rated and more violent, so we'll make Super.
yeah,
And yeah.
and
There's a
making him kind of a Christian nut job,
yeah, that was it. Yeah.
disconnected from reality.
Is that what Hollywood is? Is Hollywood just like a bunch of like 16-year-old guys who are like, we've seen this, we need to make it R-rated now?
I like to think that it's sort of this continuous circle where now, they've seen that superheroes make money, and now that the studios own the rights to make their own, when that gets exhausted, I hope it kind of falls the same way where you had the indie black and white boom, that
Mm.
led to Turtles and Cerebus and Faust and 8 million other short-lived black and white superhero comics of questionable quality and morals. You'll kind of see the same thing where they're going to start throwing uh, darts at the wall and seeing what sticks.
I
And
do I do like the idea of like executives wandering through like an indie comic, indie zine fair looking for content. There's something very
yeah,
satisfying about that.
because they wouldn't know what to make of it. Some of the stuff they wouldn't see it that it's satire. Like probably the prime example would be Faust, that it's so over the top and gratuitous and gross that if you take it seriously, you're missing out on the joke. But to Joe Schmo in a boardroom looking for a new IP, like, oh, the kids is gonna love this. He's from hell. He looks like Wolverine, and it's real gritty, and he's a serious hero.
Yeah, and we can get it cheap because the guy's not very well known, so we no one
Yeah,
knows about it. We can get it cheap. I just it almost comes to that level where like where you see Comic Cons and stuff now, and you see people walking around and they look completely out of place, surrounded by
oh
all
yeah,
these cosplayers, and you just see someone walk through in like an Armani suit. And you're like, that guy doesn't belong here. And like, there's a woman over there who's like dressed all in black, and I'm very confused. Like, are they agents from Shield? Like, no, that's just business now.
and they're getting confused as Mulder and Scully.
That'd be the best. Yeah, that's perfect. That's got an indie comic like storyline written all over it.
Yeah,
Executives getting mistaken from
under
cosplayers and taken
undercover
in.
executives looking for IPs, but not really understanding the material or what makes it shine.
When you end up accidentally cosplaying as undercover agents from other things.
See, now that's kind of interesting because that's good, the way they've gone with some character designs in the
Hmm.
comics, and you can kind of see that they are maybe doing it in the movies too. That it's designed specifically for the ease of having people cosplay as it, because that's a great way to maintain your IP and keep it in the public eye. Is have people give you free promotion.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seeing redesigns of some of the goofier characters, especially DC. Like I want a streetwise version of Green Lantern that some 16-year-old can see and go, oh wow, I need some Doc Martens, some cargo pants. That's going to be the next wave.
See,
Is making Golden Age heroes as
yeah.
cosplay ready modern superheroes.
I think the funny thing of that is that those characters already exist. Like you're saying, like a streetwise version of Green Lantern is Guy Gardner, who was like a
Yeah,
leather jacket and some boots, and he was basically there. And then you think about like Iron Man and Superman and all these things. They all had like these B movie
yeah.
side characters who were imitations of them, and Marvel and DC brought them in to be like, oh hey, we need more of this, but with a different storyline or background.
The
And
cyborg Superman as the the big
Yeah.
one that everyone remembers that was just a massive letdown.
See, I there's like a subtle part of me which enjoyed it.
The design was great, and I remember finally getting the trade paperback that collected all of the Return of Superman stuff
Right,
from
yeah.
Walden Books, and right on the cover of it was the cyborg Superman. Oh, this is gonna be amazing, and you kind of know it's not the real Superman, obviously, but you think, well, this guy's gonna have a great story and some
Hmm.
cool powers, and he's gonna get to shine, and it is the prime example of surface level cool because he's a dead astronaut that I forget what company it is,
Yeah.
rebuilt him, and he never got to do much. That's probably the biggest crime of that era, that you had a cyborg version of Superman that looked pretty badass. Little like Deathlock, but not didn't have the
Yeah.
decaying flesh.
Not too much, like too similar, just enough similar that you might mistake
Enough that
it.
you're gonna get the crowd that just saw Terminator 2 to look at a Superman book.
Yeah. I mean, I also think there's a as much as conspiracy headed as it is, I think a lot of studios now will do a thing where they make movies and covers which look very similar
Yeah,
because they're trying to get parents who don't know what they're buying to buy that thing. So they're like, oh, that's definitely Iron Man when it's not. And it's just like
sure.
that imitation of it. Oh, I'm like, yeah, that's this is Batman, this is DC, and it's like he'll like that. And it's like, it's that classic thing of the kid on Christmas Day who's getting the cut price version of the thing they actually
Yeah,
wanted. And I think
the
that's the thing.
the discount version.
Yeah. The Wish version is it's commonly known
That's
nowadays.
I'm from America, but I live in the UK,
I was
and
gonna
so
say,
if I go to a like a newsagents type store where they got all the periodicals,
hmm,
Marvel, maybe DC, but now that I think about it, I've only seen Marvel. They put out they're about the size of a trade paperback, but they've got like a flimsier cover, not quite normal monthly title flimsy, but not paperback cardboard. And all of the covers are just that generic sort of, if it's an Iron Man one, it's the Iron Man art that you've seen on a t-shirt. If it's X-Men, doesn't matter if it's the Grant Morrison X-Men where they're wearing black suits, it's going to be that 90s era Wolverine with the fangs jumping out at you.
mhm.
And I imagine, like you said, being a kid that gets that, and you look at the cover and go, wow, this is going to be great. Look at Iron Man. He's all jacked. He's got guns everywhere. And then you open it up and it's like the Matt Fraction run where he's sad because he's rich.
Hmm.
What a bummer that would be.
I know, right? The poor rich people out there who are just trying to live their lives in their mansions and suddenly feel
Yeah.
like they need to get involved in the lives of everybody else.
I do occasionally look through them because I want to see how that goes in terms of
Hmm.
what story arcs they collect. And it seems to be newer ones. But I keep hoping, and I tell myself I'd actually buy it if I saw it, where you get once again that kid bait sort of, moms know this character kind of cover,
Yeah.
and it's Iron Man, but then you open it and it's Demon in a bottle, and little Timmy who really liked Iron Man, in the Avengers movies is going to have to read about the time he was an alcoholic and vaporized a guy when he was drunk. I forgot about that.
There's so many like throwaway areas in comics where I follow a few Twitters which are like out of context comics panels,
Hmm.
and there's so many bits where you just like, how did this get into this comic? Like this whole like plot line, especially when it comes to like sex and stuff. A lot of that
Oh
in the
yeah,
90s was way more included. And you said, like, they were making this for like 13-year-olds, and they threw in like some marital affair, and we're like,
yeah.
yeah, 13-year-olds will care about this.
Yeah, you'd get a lot of that, or any of the Jim Lee X-Men sort of
Mm,
romance drama between, well, all of the X-Men, because apparently that
yeah,
was just like the Big Brother house where they're all banging each other.
yeah. X-Men, there is no holds barred in the X-Men house. As it were. I was going to ask you because I mean I knew you were in the UK, but I didn't realize that you were from America. And I was going to say, like, how are you finding that in terms of kind of like fiction, US to UK? Do you see there's like a massive difference?
Um, I mean, from what I've seen at the stores, equal stuff is available. I haven't seen anything really, that I wouldn't be able to get back in the States or vice versa. Um, except for which this is the topic when you asked me to pitch a topic, it was like old pulp novels.
Mm,
I've become really interested in that difference, the fiction that existed in the 50s and 60s in pulp magazines. That never really happened in the UK, apparently. That whole sleaze, rough, coarse newsprint, crazy articles, and that kind of stuff where it's presented as truth or written as if it's journalistic, but it's a story called the let me just I've got my pile of books that I've pulled off the shelf. Um Passion Slave of the Whip Goddess. There we go. That's a prime pulp story.
yeah.
Written with a complete journalistic edge. And doing a bit of research on it, that never really kind of came over to the UK or Europe. But
No.
both America and Australia
Mm,
had booming markets for that sort of thing. And it kind of started because I was wanting to reread some of the Mickey Spillane, Mike Hammer stuff.
mm,
And it's not impossible to find, but you I'd pay a little bit extra for cheap old paperbacks than I would back home. Was the
yeah.
only difference. But no one I've talked to that really likes crime fiction over here has heard of it. And having those conversations, there's obviously in the UK there were their own detectives and that idea of crime fiction. And it got me thinking about how completely American that concept of the dime novel detective, especially Mike Hammer, who's basically a thug, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
carries around the gun and just flat out says in the movie with Ralph Meeker, I'm not that smart. I just find someone who knows a bit more and I beat it out of them. It's
Yeah.
a very uniquely American kind of hero. You can't
Yeah.
quite picture Hercule Poirot
Yeah.
punching a thug's head into the brick repeatedly until
I,
he gets some information.
I was just about to say, like, European detective and crime was very much held behind the middle class veneer of England,
Right.
and it was very much like there's this, like Midsummer Murders and all these kind of like shows which take place in like country villages and manor
Yeah.
houses, and everything gets stripped back to there. No one was looking at us in a city and going, yeah, we should send a guy in there, because they didn't want to think about that. They want to think about like the nice methodical view of
Yeah.
the world and how everything was, dukes and lords and all those kinds of things. But no, it's interesting that you say that about kind of Americana not really making it over here in that fashion, because I think I agree in the sense of, yeah, we held back in terms of content and publishing in that way. But at the same time, England and Britain at least have a very like almost childlike view of publishing, in the sense of we didn't do a lot of adult novels, but
Really.
there's a lot of like children's publishing was very very like indie, and there was a lot of like sci-fi and stuff like that. But that was the problem, like you say, like that kind of fantastical edge of parody and journalism and pulp in America was taken up by adults who were like, yeah, this is the stuff we want to read, this is the paperback volume. Whereas here it was thrown to children. It wasn't seen for adults because
Huh.
adults were too busy doing adult things.
So that's interesting because I kind of thought it would have been. I was surprised that pulp didn't really happen in the UK on the basis that I tend to think of it as like London,
Mm,
massive city, obviously the home of publishing and probably a lot of sales of print media. I can't imagine a better vehicle of fiction than a cheap. I actually have, where is it? One of the UK editions of uh, of like a true crime kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
smaller than a regular paperback. Printed in London, 1954. It would fit really well in your inside breast pocket on your jacket. And
It
reading
would.
that on the tube is what I would have thought would have.
But then you'd have to think, do you want to be seen reading that? Because we're very repressed as a country.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah, all the salacious covers.
There's a lot of fiction in the UK which kind of got hidden, I think. And this is what we find now, especially if you go to kind of charity shops and flea
Yeah.
markets in the UK. You'll be going through books and covers, and you'll find something. You'll be like, when was this made? And it was like, oh, this was from like 1950, published in Essex somewhere. And you're looking at it like, why has no one ever really heard of this? And you look it up online, and it'll have been seen by like 10 people. And it's because a lot of those books were just kept in houses, in a box, in the attic, and never really meant to be seen by the world. Because you can't be seen to be reading trash. You need to be seen to be reading the classics, and you need to be seen to be educating yourself. Nobody reads trash, and yet it's there. It's just very well hidden.
That hadn't occurred to me, and I don't know. Maybe I'll have to try to go to a few more estate sales because I am a huge mark for thrift stores and over here at charity shops. Like, I live in a small town where there's quite a few of them, and my loop once a week is go to get the groceries, but I take the long way so I can hit all the charity shops. And I'm always on the lookout for it, but I don't think I've ever actually found one thing that I would consider pulp. I mean, you'll find like a Raymond Chandler paperback, a modern one, but Chandler wasn't really, that was a step for him until he could get to write full-length novels.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a bit more, you could be seen in public reading a Raymond Chandler book.
Yeah, you could get away with that. It's got a nice font to it, so you'd be fine.
But I have noticed that over here, the two things that I just went through and picked up a bunch was decided I'm going to reread the Conan stuff I wanted to. Sold it all when I moved over here. Time to rebuy it, and I've been dreading it, thinking, oh, God, it's going to cost a bunch of money. They are probably the cheapest paperbacks I've ever found on eBay. Like, complete set, £10.
Yeah.
But it is the Frazetta covers, which I didn't expect to be used over here because you talk, like you just said, you don't want to be seen reading that kind of stuff in public. Those Frazetta covers, if you're worried about reading something like that in public where she's got a little bit of cleavage and a sideways glance, those Frazetta covers where the women are, let's be honest, nude, they might be wearing a breastplate or some sort of garb, but it's so perfectly formed, and you can tell when it was originally drawn in pencil. Yeah. She's naked, and Frazetta was like, oh yeah, I got to put some there. She's wearing a top.
I've got to put clothes on this person.
And then you've got there's one cover, Conan the Freebooter, which actually, at least over here, it might be one I just never saw in the States. There's full on, like, he's decapitating a gorilla on the cover. And these are the mid-60s publications.
Yeah. So it's interesting as well. I think in the UK, at least, there was very much a deviation between fantasy and horror and kind of real world detective and everything else in the category. Like, so that kind of like you mentioning, well, like sci-fi and fantasy work, a lot of that stuff is what became pulp in the UK. Because again, it was seen as like nonsensical, it was seen as fantasy, it was seen as, something you didn't have to worry about, and was perhaps for
there's no veneer of it being real life.
There's no veneer of real life, so then it couldn't corrupt anybody because it's fantasy. And then obviously we got the whole it'll corrupt everybody with like D&D and Satanic Panic and all that kind of stuff. But when you think about the timeline of kind of publication things in the 60s and 70s, at the same time you had things like television censorship, which was amping up in the UK at that time. And
really? See, I don't know much about that at all. I know about the video nasties, and that's kind of my where it begins and ends for my knowledge on that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it it had, I mean, obviously I know in the US there was kind of like the censorship board and the rules for what you could do on TV and how they kind of like gradually deteriorated. In the UK, again, it wasn't so much that these things weren't being published, it was just they were being pushed out of the public eye, or you were seen as a deviant for being involved with them in any capacity. Which is again that kind of led into like the punk era, which was an absolute revolution against that. And it was like, well, no, we have all these things, and then zines came around and just retaliated. We're oppressed people, and then when we get annoyed, we do it big, and then it gets, we get locked down afterwards again. Which is, I mean, I guess our current retaliation.
So now, who would be because I know like Michael Moorcock, like, he is a British author, right?
Mm-hmm.
The guy did Elric. So I think of him as probably the most contemporarily British fantasy hero. The opposite of Conan, very smart, not very physically imposing, bit dainty, but he has a vampire sword. And then Tolkien, there's really not much else I know of any fantasy stuff.
So I'd say one of the most common ones is Pratchett, like Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, of course, Pratchett.
Yeah, and I always kind of class him in like a pulp capacity because
I could see that
his work was so heavily produced. Like there's so many, like every charity shop in the UK has a copy of Terry Pratchett. There's always usually a shelf of it. But at the same time, it was very tongue in cheek. It was very pointing fun at everything else which was going on, and there was like a few darker bits, but it was lighthearted. And I think that again, I think maybe shields people from what the UK did with fiction, because we have such a habit of being uncomfortable with serious subjects, so we'll put a joke in it. We'll not discuss, or we'll discuss sex and we'll discuss violence, or we'll discuss something very, very serious, but it will be done with like a light-hearted edge, so it's palatable. Whereas in the US, obviously, it's just, we're going to go full ball on this.
Yeah, that kind of makes a lot more sense, because I think I've been going to a few used bookstores, and before I found out that pulp magazines didn't really have, like, the men's adventure stuff specifically, the 60s, 70s, and I think there was still probably a few in the 80s. You can find a lot of those in any vintage shop, bookstore, any used shop that has magazines in the US. You're going to find some. They're going to be a little ratty because it's not like they were well built to begin with, but they're there. And never really turned up any of those. But one of the things that I have found in many charity shops over here is, to me, something that is ripped straight from those pages. The Mark Bolan Executioner books.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
The Don Pendleton. Well, Don Pendleton, I think, only wrote the first 39, but of course it has his name on the whole series. But it's always in a charity shop that'll have a massive vein of Tom Clancy, what's his name, Andy McNabb. And then there'll be a few Executioner books plugged in there, which I like to think that someone's grandfather, someone's getting their granddad some reading material, and you got the Tom Clancy books that are about that thick, and espionage involving submarines or whatever it is he's writing about. Andy McNabb, I assume the same thing. And then, what's this? Executioner takes on domestic terrorism. Yeah, that's war. He gets in that, and I don't know if you've ever read any of those books. They are.
I tried reading a Tom Clancy novel once, and
oh no, I mean the Executioner.
Oh, the Executioner. No, I haven't.
Oh, I recommend it.
Yeah, they are like Tom Clancy.
No, it predates like the canon action films. But like, if you ever saw the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie, it's the best movie based on the Executioner, because that's what he's like.
Right.
I guess the whole thing is he's an ex-sniper, comes home, and what's great about that, whereas the Punisher, you're always he's avenging his family, and you never really forget that. The Executioner, after about the second book, he comes home and what his younger sister is turning tricks for the mob because his dad got in debt with them from gambling, and his mother, basically a bunch of them get killed, and
Right.
then his brother goes younger brother goes crazy and ends up in a mental hospital. And then about 3 books later, that character just kind of disappears, and he's never really ever brooding or that upset, even in the first book where he's like, I'm gonna use my Vietnam honed skills to
Yep.
bring the war home. He's going out getting with I think in the first book he hooks up with like 5 different women. Yeah, never seems that upset, drinks some
Yep.
whiskey, polishes his guns, makes
See,
jokes.
this is it's so far removed from the dowager of fine estate was murdered. And you just reminded me. I remember when I studied censorship in the 70s, and there was a thing about revenge, and there was a rule in film where characters could take revenge, but they had to be upset about it. Like that was the rule of like
That
they
is that's
initially,
amazing.
yeah,
I
initially
love that.
you couldn't take revenge in a film. Like that was the initial thing. And the prime examples, Todd Browning's Freaks, where
Yeah.
yeah, they take revenge, and they banned it because they were like, there's a revenge plot in this film, you can't have that, amongst the other
Huh.
things to do with Todd Browning's Freaks, which obviously they didn't like. But that was a thing, and then they changed it. It was like, okay, they can take revenge, but they have to show remorse for what they've done. They can't feel satisfied by it because that will corrupt the nation. And
See
we just
now,
all the barriers, which is all the barriers of what we do.
yeah, I like I love the Hammer horror movies,
Mm,
but I never quite understood why they were so, they were considered so hardcore in the UK, even for
mm.
being 60s era. And now that you say that there were rules like that about like how you take revenge was grounds for censorship, I now kind of see why, the Hammer stuff was, hardcore for the era.
That's why we embraced Americana so much. Was it was stuff which you couldn't get hold of in the UK, or to get hold of it, you'd have to go somewhere really seedy. Like you could get flash fiction, but you'd be in a sex shop buying it.
Right.
It's like, because that's the only place you could buy a banned book, would be in somewhere where there's already things which are considered to be deviant. And so when America started pumping out stuff, and one of the reasons we kind of embraced comics so much as well was because it was readily available. You could get it. You could just go buy it, get it shipped in, and it was just so in your face. But again,
Yeah.
that led to the biggest stereotype of Americans being loud and brash and all this kind of stuff, because that's everything we were receiving and everything we were
Sure.
consuming.
So now on the subject of comics though,
Hmm.
so 2000 AD, that comes out a bit about what? Early 70s, 72,
Yeah, that's like 70s.
73, I
Yeah.
believe. Judge Dredd is way more gruesome than any of the Marvel DC stuff that would have come
Hmm.
over. And of course, it is a satire of America as a whole, but especially the American police
Yeah.
when you put them next to British police.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how did that work then? Or is it because Dredd is, once again, I guess, pretty far in the future? There's flying cars and stuff, and there is a bit of a fantasy element.
Yeah.
They were able to get away with that?
It's where it's where it started to drift and where it started to change. It's like, the
Okay.
70s were kind of coming around. They passed the Summer of Love. Everything had kind of was edging into punk rock as well. So there was a lot of that kind of flash fiction, flash zines, riot girl zines. Music was taking off, and then in comics, it began to be very much okay. Well, if the Americans are cranking out this stuff, we can do that as well. The music's getting more angry. What level of parody can we do? Because the UK is known for satire. We're known
Yeah.
for sarcasm and taking people on, but not in a violent way. It's always in a
No.
comical way. It's spitting image, it's grotesque, but it's
Yeah.
children based. So when stuff like 2000 AD started coming out, it was very much along the lines of, okay, well, first off, he's American, so we don't need to worry about offending anyone in the UK. And let's just put it in a fantasy setting, because no one, no one's going to relate that to the UK industry of, industrial complex.
Yeah.
And you can push it that way, and then they went as far as they could and further, and then that's when you start to see more gruesome sci-fi come out of the UK, and more along
Right.
those lines of just us adapting more of that, which I always find interesting now, is that from the US standpoint and the UK standpoint, I often think we now go further than the US does, because US media is so heavily censored these days.
Yeah. Well, it's both censored, and then you have that American tradition of hardcore capitalism where one company will own a good portion of the smaller companies that represent
Mhm.
publishing or film or music. And so there's not a lot of smaller companies competing, each trying to outdo each other, which leads to great stories and great characters.
Mhm.
Instead, you've got, well, what you have right now with Marvel and DC. They're just IP farms for Disney and Warner Brothers, and they don't really expect the comics to sell at all. So why try?
Yeah,
And
the censorship side of it is something which I still haven't gotten used to over here. Like a good example from last night was I was watching. Have you seen the Reanimator film?
oh yeah,
Yeah, so I was watching Reanimator on television. So just on like the TV channel, which came free with my TV. It was like, we're showing an old film. I was watching that, and they blurred out the nudity, and there was beeps in the swearing, and I'm like,
mhm.
it's 11 o'clock at night. Like, the people watching this have seen nudity, are aware of what swearing is, and if a kid is up late, then that's just like bad parenting. But this is just, why? Why is this?
I I love that kind of stuff. Honestly, that leads to just some of it makes the movie almost better and more legendary. But Reanimator is kind of a strange one to even bother to show if you have to censor it.
The violence was fine.
It's a splatter film, first of all. Like there's nothing but sex and blood in it.
All the violence was shown.
It'd be a bit like, I don't know, putting a body count song on the radio. Like you're gonna have to take out enough of it to make it presentable. Man, what was it, Reanimator, about a 45-minute movie when you cut out the
Well,
uh, the the good stuff?
this is the thing. Like the violence was all there,
Oh yeah,
but you can't have nudity,
you're
and
you're gonna
they
get
beep the swearing.
you. I forget what it is because I looked into it um, primarily because of the way I saw RoboCop as a kid. Was you see the TV version first, and then you bug your parents to get you the tape.
Yeah.
And I've got a whatever anniversary edition back on the shelf that comes with the TV edit. So of
I don't think
course,
I've ever seen the
you know,
TV edit. Yeah.
oh, it's fantastic because it really does show you what the censors considered gratuitous in terms of
Mhm.
violence versus it was like, ah, yeah, that's fine. This is a family movie.
Yeah.
And so it's weird stuff where, of course, head wounds, that's got to go. And then not all limbs being blown off, but stuff like, I think, fingers, gets
Right.
censored for some reason. But like the big example is the scene in the boardroom when Ed 209 goes haywire and starts turning the guy into cottage cheese. Basically unchanged. Like I think they trim a second off of it, but it's
That's
the
mad.
guy falls back, it's sitting there going and viscera is flying. But then of course you gotta cut out the F words.
Of course, you can't let kids
That's
hear swearing.
that's what's gonna cause the downfall of society. That's kind of my favorite thing to look at over here when I rebuy something that I used to own in America.
Yeah.
Got to rebuy it over here. How the ratings change.
Yeah.
Because some of the stuff it's funny if it's more of a sex comedy kind of thing. I think the prime example is I think Clerks, or one of Kevin Smith's movies, is rated just a 15 over here.
Yeah.
But of course, in the U.S., it's hard R because of all the swearing. But over here, stuff where it's just dirty words. Nah, I don't care. That's fine as long as there's no violence, no implied pain or torture. Yeah, you can put that on for the 13 to 15 crowd, which
Yeah.
makes sense really when you think about it. Obviously, a few dirty words, not that big of a deal.
I
Head
mean,
wounds, probably a bit more choosy with that.
yeah, I always think with the UK, if you if you did too much censorship of language, you wouldn't be able to include a lot of major cities in your films because the street language is so sweary. Um, so
Right.
it's like, yeah, but whereas in guns and violence, we're not down on that side of things. It's interesting to see that though, like especially from both my perspective and your perspective, people who moved country and created things, is how other artists do react to that. Like
Yeah.
when seeing yours and not knowing that you're from the US, I was like, this is pretty violent for coming out of the UK. Like, no one in the UK is sitting going, I'm going to make a Trump comic about
Yeah, where
this.
people are disemboweled,
Yeah.
all my normal. I like to draw violence
Hmm.
to the point where it's itchy and scratchy slash yeah Massimo Mattioli, the guy who, for all intents and purposes, really created itchy and scratchy,
Hmm.
but Matt Groening kind of kept that quiet for a long time.
Yeah.
That level of violence where it's stupid. There's no other way to say it. It's not remotely offensive or shocking because it's so over the top
Yeah.
that sure one or two people could take it seriously, but one of the ones in the book that made me laugh and has made a few people laugh is he rips someone's head clean off, easily, because in my comics people are just bags of red goo.
Yep.
There's not really any structure there. Rips the head off, throws it. Two heads then explode. Eyeballs shoot out. I think there's 5 or 6 eyeballs, even though it's 2 heads, because why not?
Yep.
Yeah, that is. I I kind of wonder now because I've given the copies where it's just black and white to a few coworkers who wanted to read it,
Mm.
and yeah, you spend all day talking to people. You know what each other's humor is, so you're not shocking. But I do wonder if I gave that to someone who maybe liked independent comics, but is more into the European albums or whatever's more contemporary. What would their initial reaction be of
Mm.
something like that?
Yeah. I think it speaks to the value though of kind of needing to see what other countries and cultures are up to. Like you're saying,
Yeah.
like with Pulp Fiction and picking up comics from different creators. I think it's a great way of kind of expanding your repertoire outside of, like, I
Oh,
mean, just obviously
absolutely.
regular media and films can be kind of hard, like we were saying at the beginning of, it's hard to find time to consume some stuff sometimes. So seeing what indie creators make is a good reflection of what's kind of happening.
Yeah. Well, and now that stuff is so much more available,
Mm.
like honestly, if you were to look at my comics, like 90% of it's European artists, because that's just who speaks to me at this point.
Mm.
Yeah, probably the one that's the most represented would be this. I think he's Norwegian. Jason is just that's what he goes by, just one word like share,
Mm.
and it's a Lynn Claire, Hergé style.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure he does it with a brush because there's thicker lines and it's variations.
Right.
And he deals with uh, pulp characters and archetypes, but then because it's so downplayed, it becomes more about the emotions. That's where his subtlety really is it's in the slight variation in mouth movement or eye shape.
Mm.
And one of the best ones that really just showcases how you can play with very silly pop trash culture imagery and monsters and stuff
Mm.
is it's a wordless comic or wordless short album he did, where it's this luchador guy goes into a castle to save a woman, and then each page is it's all 4-panel grid.
Right.
He has to fight a cyborg who looks like the Terminator. He has to fight Godzilla that's, you know, his size. He's got to fight a couple of trolls. Like, just keeps going down the line of every kind of, you know, monster you'd see in the horror section of your video store. And then at the end, he's just so exhausted, he kind of, you know, slumps down. And then the final panel, instead of him carrying out the woman, which is what he's thinking of when he goes in on the first pages, she's carrying him out. And it's all that kind of wry, clever, and fun stuff. And then conversely, I buy a lot of Japanese stuff.
Hmm.
There's this art movement that it started in the 80s and still goes strong today, usually in alternative manga journals called Heita Uma.
Hmm.
And it's loosely translates in English to bad good,
Right.
but you get stuff where it kind of covers this whole gamut of, you know, you'll have someone like Goto Yukai, I think is her name, and she draws. It looks like she draws it on the subway on her way to work.
Right.
You know, no pencil, nothing, just pen, paper, and it's about what goes on in the subways of Japan. And there's this Power Rangers esque team that goes and fights these threats,
Hmm.
but they don't wear costumes or nothing. They're just normal people. But they assemble like that, and you deal with all the tropes of that kind of storytelling. And then the two other guys of that same movement that I really like, one of them is sorry, a frog in my throat. Ibaisu Yoshikazu,
Hmm.
who, the best way I can explain his art is it's do you know Ray Pettibone, the guy who did like a lot of Black Flag
Oh yeah.
artwork?
Yeah.
Less ink heavy, but that same sort of like brush line with a few embellishments. And it deals heavily with the absurdity of everyday life and then plays it out to gratuitous ends.
Hmm.
One of his best stories is it's these two kind of construction worker guys, bosses, dick to his underling, you know, real rude to him, just spends the whole day riding his ass. And the kid gets enough of it, beats him to death with a crowbar, and you'd think, okay, that's where it's going to end. You know,
Hmm.
it's a violent power fantasy of how, you know, sometimes you want to beat your boss. That's not where it ends.
Right.
Of course, people see this, call the cops, and this riot group comes in, and all he can do is piss himself as they surround him, and then that's where it ends. So it
Right.
plays out to its not real world end, but the logical conclusion if you go further than you would normally end.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think.
lastly would be Takashi Namoto,
Hmm.
who honestly surprises me, came out of Japan, because that's the first Heida Uma stuff I saw. And it's, if you go from reading the manga we get in the West,
Hmm.
which is what I did, directly to someone saying, oh, you should check this guy out, find the one version of his stuff in English, buy it, read it. It makes R. Crumb's nastiest stuff, his most controversial stuff, look like Winnie the Pooh.
Wow. Okay.
It is purely filth, and there
Right.
is a story to it, and it actually does have something to say. But you know, when you kind of got to read it a couple of times because the
Yeah.
imagery is so shocking. But same, once again, it's all drawn in this sort of cartoony style, similar to Hergé or any of the Lynn Claire stuff where there's no shading.
Hmm.
But it's gratuitous in a way that the word simply doesn't cover, and it's fantastic. But you can kind of see where, in the way it was explained to me by uh, someone who's from Japan and one of the guys who recommended it to me, is that this is a society that's very polite, and you know, you do this in public.
Hmm.
So conversely, in media, especially if it's media for adults, you're going to have something that goes to the complete opposite end of the spectrum in bad taste.
Yeah. I,
And I wonder, I'd like to see some of that attitude applied in Western comics.
yeah. I
Not a
think.
lot, you know, you don't
No,
need
not too
that
much.
much of it, but just that one little bit of in your face
Mm.
kind of a punk rock attitude.
I think there's, to kind of bring it to kind of a couple of rounded points. I think you're right. I think I almost feel like that stuff does exist. It's just very well hidden.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, even kind of finding your stuff, and when I bought this your Spawn book, it was kind of like, okay, this is the kind of stuff I like. It's that kind of comic-y, lowbrow, but with like a message, and that kind of 90s aesthetic to it, which is like a big thing. And I read a lot of that stuff, and I went to a zine store the other day, and again, I kind of bought that kind of stuff. But I
yeah,
had to go through so much to get it. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of people get trapped in the idea of complicating their message with what they're
sure.
creating. And I think we can only get kind of more of the valuable in your face work when people accept that you don't need a multiverse, and you don't need 20 storylines to carry a story through a comic. If you just
No,
stick to like a simple message, kind of like you're saying, like the bad good stuff, it's just a simple idea, like one liner idea, and then just exploring where that idea goes is
yeah,
what
following it to
creators
its
need to
end.
do. Yeah, like, I mean, whereas a lot of people start off with, they're very much like, I know a bunch of writers and a bunch of people who've spoken to me about, they've got this idea, they're working on this idea, they're fleshing out the characters, they're building the world, and they lose sight of the fact that they should just probably just write the book, you
Yeah.
know, because
Oh, that's one
you're
of
trying to
the.
complex it.
I now consider that the biggest mistake I ever made was reading Blake Snyder's Save the Cat,
Right.
because have you ever read that? Or
No, no.
so if you look it up, it's his beat sheet, which is now mostly used in Hollywood. Like, you can look at it and go watch the newest movie from Disney, and it's going to follow it to a T.
Mm-hmm.
But it's basically not only perfecting the idea of a 3-act story structure, but breaking down the key components in it. And it's what makes a lot of stuff seem very samey, especially the kind of people who get really into, I need my character to be this, this, and this. And
Mm-hmm.
it does kind of tend to be the people who want to tell more grounded, or not grounded, but more relatable stories with a hero you actually want to root for.
Yeah.
And I'll routinely get that when I'm sketching out ideas. I, my mind will kind of go back to, okay, well, I need to do this, this, and this. And you got to remember to throw that out,
Yeah.
because not only can it become predictable once you know how to recognize it, it also sets you up to only be able to tell a few
Yeah.
stories.
Definitely. I've routinely found myself, or I found one of the reasons I kind of like watching media is not knowing the end. So
Yeah,
I routinely don't include an end in the stuff which I make. The kind of the comics and things we make. And I think that comes from watching quite a few Coen Brother films where everything happens but nothing changes. And I
yeah,
love that sensibility of, these are just little pockets of what's going on, and getting to the end and going, oh well, that was that.
yeah.
We don't need anything else extra to add to it. Why not?
No, it's one of the things that I love to do that you kind of can't do with any sort of anything to do with the beat sheet,
Mm,
is unlikable characters beyond Holden Caulfield. Like,
yeah.
that's why Donald Trump or not Spawn, like, following characters who you don't want to hang out with them. They're not even a lovable dirtbag. They're just a dick. And when I'm sketching out ideas, like, I've boiled it down now to because I know exactly how many panels I can fit per page. And I
Mm-hmm.
tend to think about each page as either a whole scene, if I can make it fit and not feel compressed like an exposition dump,
Yeah.
or one steady camera angle for that page if it's taking place in the same unit or same scene.
Mm-hmm.
But I will just have a sheet of paper scrawled with just the ideas, because if you can tell, anyone can really tell a story. The key components that we all understand is it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
So getting bogged down with, oh, I need to have the theme stated here. We need to see the character do this. Oh, and then Act 3 has to be punctuated with a loss that turns into a new opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm much more interested at this point in movies, media, or any sort of storytelling made by people who have no idea what they're doing and are approaching it with raw enthusiasm. Uh, One of the best action movies I've seen in years and years and years is um, this Ugandan flick, Who Killed Captain Alex? Which,
Right.
have you heard of it or seen it?
No.
So it's on YouTube free. The production company is called Wakaliwood, like Wakanda, but
Hmm.
also Hollywood. And it's,
I
I
think I've
think,
heard of
about
that. Yeah.
10 years old at this point. But it's just an action movie made by a bunch of people who loved American action movies and
Mhm.
really wanted to make their own. So they built their props. They all have a fundamental understanding of what a story is, and so it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it'll veer off into these absolutely insane action sequences, bonkers camera angles, characters that in a movie made by people who knew what they were doing, you'd ascribe to the Chekhov's gun rule, where we've seen this character do this, so he must be important.
Yeah.
Nope, someone just really wanted to do that camera angle, so they did it. And you get to see just that pure love of whatever it is that media is, and what they bring to it.
Yeah.
Same thing with comics. Like, I'd much rather see something that someone drew at their kitchen table because they just had this compulsion to do it than someone who, wrote a script, did a few drafts, has really perfected this style. You know, I want to see the unfiltered id on the page or on the screen.
I think that's a very good message to round this out. I think that's the way people should create. I sadly though I do have a finishing up question to bring this to an end, Paul. But no, otherwise, no, I do want to say thank you for coming on, because it's been a nice little wild ride through Pulp Fiction. As it were.
Thanks for listening to me ramble.
No worries. So my final question for you, and I'm asking every guest this year, is who should I speak to next? Who do you think I should have on the show next? I'll try to contact to get on the show.
Oof, that's tough.
I'm stumping everyone with that. I'm getting to the end and finding. But I thought I should ask the people who come on, because I enjoy their work, and find, follow the rabbit hole, see where it takes me.
I can only give you one name, or can I give you like a top three?
You can give me a top three. I can try to anyone I will try to contact is essentially, and they can be big or small. I will try to contact Todd McFarlane if I need to. He won't reply, but we can try.
So, two of them, one of them I know personally, have known for years. The other one's going to be a comic guy who I think is probably, he's very entertaining to listen to him talk.
Right.
But he'd also, be able to just go on and on and on, and he's really interesting to listen to. And then the third one is this guy who lives in Japan, who I buy a lot of my manga from, but he's an expat from America who lives in Japan, and now his full-time job is going around digging for manga, or if you ask him for stuff, he'll go and get it, and then he sells it, and he's got this encyclopedic knowledge of stuff that doesn't exist outside of Japan, that we wouldn't see if it weren't for guys like him. And it's a fascinating job that I'm just surprised that can be a job.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear him talk.
Sure.
So the first guy would be a good buddy of mine, Rick Petty, who's a filmmaker out of St. Louis, Missouri. We've made a few films together. He's written probably a dozen scripts at this point. Really into what I would call that kind of two-fisted action movie type stuff.
Okay.
Guys going on adventures, or really grimy Coen brothers, what could be a crime drama, but it's about a guy who owns a sandwich shop.
Hmm.
Really down to earth films that I think there should be more of.
Definitely.
And then the comic guy would be Adam Yeater, who does a comic called Blood Desert, and he does it monthly, produces the whole thing himself, does amazing watercolor covers, uses a brush to ink, and he actually is one of the reasons I don't erase my pencil lines and stuff. Is he did it first,
Right.
and he gave a reason. The reason he gave for it is he wants you to see that this is not done on an iPad. This is paper, and you can look at it and see the steps that went into it,
Hmm.
which is just a mind-blowing idea that has made looking at his stuff at least vastly more fun.
Definitely.
And I'd like to think that people kind of get the same thing out of mine, where you can see the steps that went into it.
Hmm. Came
And
from a
so
real person.
those are the three I'd nominate.
Okay, I like it. I will find them. Well, I will also ask you for contact details, but I will look them up. But no, fantastic. Well, hopefully this hasn't been too painful.
No,
You enjoyed
I
yourself.
like talking, so
It's always
hopefully
been...
I didn't burn out the receiver.
No, definitely not. No, I think it's been a good little journey through fiction from different cultures, and yeah, no, it's been great. In that case, then we'll call it there, and we will
Perfect.
talk to these guys later. Thanks very much.